Hi everyone. In our last video, we discovered how we could use the business intelligence tool to create a simple base query by pulling in different tables from the SiteStacker database and using the data points in those tables to create columns for our simple reports. In this video, I want to do an overview of some of the modifiers that we can use in the business intelligence tool to further shape the data that's in our base query and to customize the front-facing reports. In this video, I also want to talk about the difference between a base dataset and an aggregate dataset, and then talk through an example of how an aggregate dataset and some of the modifiers can work together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our little person report that we've created over the last few videos, open that up, and we have our dataset, our columns, our views, but now we're going to look at this section that I like to call the modifiers, which has conditions, group by, having, order by, limit. So every data set that we create within a query comes with a list of modifiers, and so do the views. And you can use these modifiers on any of these levels to set specific parameters on your query. That can really help you narrow down the type of data that you're pulling into your query and ultimately into your reports for your users. So let's take some time to talk through each one of these and give you some examples of how you can use them. The first one here is the conditions modifier. Conditions can help you restrict the type of data that's being pulled into your query. And if I right click on conditions, you can see we have a couple here. This is what we would call our simple condition and then our smart condition. And these operate similar to the simple and smart columns that we discussed in a previous video. So for now, I'll add a simple condition to show you what that looks like. When I add a simple condition, it gives me the option to choose one of my tables or models from my base data set. So right now I have person, person address, and location state as my options. Let's go ahead and choose location state as our example. And then in columns, I can choose a specific column from that table. We have the name column being pulled into our query right now. So let's put a condition on the name column and say, I want the name of the state to be equal to Florida. We have all these different operators that you can choose from, equal to, greater than. Some of these will be used with number values. Some of these can be used with string values. For this one, I'm going to say is equal to, and then compare with the following value, and my value is going to be Florida. So I'll just type that exactly and hit save and close. And now I'm going to regenerate the report, and we should see that the report automatically filters down to only records that have Florida as their home state. This is a simple example of how you can restrict the data being pulled into your report, but you can see how it can be helpful for all the different types of reports that you and your team might need. In addition to simple conditions, we also have smart conditions. So to show you what that looks like, I'll go ahead and remove the simple one that I created. You can see as soon as I delete the condition, the query refreshes and goes back to the original results that we had. If I right click on conditions and add a smart condition this time, it works a lot like the smart column. So now I actually have access to pull data points from all of the tables that I have in my data set. So this could be helpful if I say maybe I want the name of the state to equal Florida, and I want the first name to equal Danny. Oh, I should put some quotes around that. Save and close. So again, the report refreshed to show me exactly the results that I wanted. It's pulling in only records that have both the conditions fulfilled. So the state is Florida and the first name is Danny. So smart conditions give you access to all of the data points available in your tables that you've pulled, and they let you daisy chain your conditions with and statements or statements. And this is where you can get creative with SQL statements as needed. Using simple and smart conditions like this is super helpful to constrain your report to show only results that you really need in your final product. And the next modifier we can talk about is the group by modifier. If I open up the group by modifier, this gives me the option to choose one data point or multiple data points to group the query by. The group by condition is really helpful in a lot of different situations. For example, let's say you have a report where you have a person listed and you see all the times that they've given to your organization. That person will show up on multiple different lines, but if you group by person ID, all of that person's information will be condensed into a single line and will shorten your report. Having is a special modifier that's used in tandem with the group by modifier. We'll have future videos that go more in depth on the having statement. The order by statement allows you to choose a specific data point to order your query by. If I double click on order by, I have access to all of my data points. So in this example, let's say I want to order by the first name in descending order, and you can go descending or ascending. I regenerate the report. Now you can see that the query is ordered to start from Z, and it's going to go all the way back up to A. I'll double click and just remove. And the last modifier is limit. And it simply lets you choose the number of lines that you'd like in your query. So let's say I want to limit my query to only include 10 lines. It's going to calculate the first 10 lines that meet all of my conditions. This is helpful in situations where you might be creating a top 10 donor report or something similar. To reiterate, we have this list of modifiers on our datasets as well as on our views. So like a funnel, we can filter our base query to specific conditions. All the way down to the view, we can get granular and filter the view to show only specific conditions as well. As we talk about ways to tailor our query too, I also want to talk about expressions and functions. If you come to a column in your query or in your view and open it up, we've looked at the expression box before, but this is where you can use SQL statements to modify your report. For example, in our query, we can see that there are a lot of blank birthdays. If I don't want that in the final product, I can go to the birthday column and choose a string function. And let's say I choose if null, so if it's blank, then I want to put the column in the column's place. I want to say NA. If I save and close, the report will update, and now we can see we don't have any blank spots in the birthday column, just the ones that don't have an actual birthday are replaced with NA. You can use the expression box for all types of functions, so you can use string functions, number functions, and aggregate functions. Aggregate functions will come in handy. We'll see an example of that later. That's referring to the sum of a number, the average of a number, things that come handy in historic giving reports. You also have access to different date functions and time functions. Again, some examples of these functions will be included in the documentation that accompanies these videos. And there are a lot of really good training resources online for different functions. Okay, now that we've gone over modifiers and some of the different functions that you can use in your columns, I want to talk about aggregate datasets. So in our report, we already have a base dataset, and we talked about how a dataset in general is really just a container for the different tables and data points that you need for your query. While every report has a base dataset, reports can also have aggregate datasets added into them. Aggregate datasets are separate from the base dataset, and they're super helpful if you need to make calculations, pull different type of data, run different conditions or functions that could otherwise affect your main query. So it lets you do all of that in kind of a separate environment, but then you can join your aggregate dataset to the base dataset so that you can use the information from the aggregate in your query as well. It's easiest to understand if we walk through it. So I'm going to come to my report, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose Add New Dataset. This is what we did when we wanted to add our base dataset, but this time, instead of checking base, we're going to check aggregate. And we can give our aggregate a name. For our report, I want to add record types. So I'm going to call this one record type info and hit save and close. Record types are super helpful for differentiating between different CRM records, so your organization probably uses a lot of them, so I think that's a good example for our little report. If I open up my base dataset and my aggregate dataset again, just like when we added our base dataset for the first time, our aggregate dataset is totally empty. It doesn't have any tables or columns, so we're going to add some of those as we build our aggregate. So just like before, we're going to right-click on our dataset, and choose Add Model. And because record types have to do with person information, we're going to go back down to the person section, and I'm going to choose Record Type Assignment and hit Save and Close. Now that I have my Record Type Assignment table, I'm going to right-click on that and choose Add Model. I'm going to add one more table, and it's this record type one right here, and hit Save and Close. One note to make as you're adding tables to your data sets is that you're going to get to know your SiteStacker database and the data points available in each table the more that you add and the more that you practice with the reporting tool. I've added record types to business intelligence reports multiple times, so I know that these tables are what I need. This table is going to have the person ID that I'm going to use to join my aggregate to my base data set. And then this table here is going to have the actual record type name that's going to be applied to each person record. So now that I have the tables that I need, I'm going to go ahead and start adding data points. So I'm going to right click on the first one, Record Type Assignment, and choose Add Column. Like I mentioned, in order to join the aggregate dataset to the base dataset, we're going to have to add the person ID column. So I'm going to choose Person ID. When I'm ready to join my aggregate, I'm going to use the person ID as the common column between these two data sets. So they both have person ID. I'm going to be able to use that to relate the aggregate data set to the base data set. So I have that column. We'll use it a little later. Right now, I'm going to add a column from the record type table. And here's where we're actually going to pull in the record type information. So if I look at the list of columns available, I have name. Again, in the context of the record type table, name is referring to the record type itself. So I'm going to add that column, and I'm actually going to rename the label and say record type to make it more clear for the rest of the query. I'm going to hit Save and Close. Perfect. So now we've got person ID and record type. What I want to do is I want to join the aggregate data set to my base data set so that I can use record type in our columns. So I'm going to go through the steps to join an aggregate data set to the base data set and make some important observations on the way. So to join our data sets, I'm going to choose the person table because that's the one with person ID. I'm going to right click on it and choose Add Dataset Join. When I click on that, I'm given a new window. Here we have a drop down of all the data sets in our query. So right now we've got person info and record type info. Record type info is the one that I'm trying to join. So I'm going to click on that. And then here you see we have a few different join or union types that we can choose from. You have left and inner, union and union all, and each of those have different implications for what the join is going to do for your query. And we'll have future videos that go into more detail on those. For this example, I'm going to leave it as a left join. And now I need to indicate the common column that both of these data sets will share. So on the left side, I'm going to choose person ID and double click that. And I'm going to say that that person ID equals this person ID, which is from our aggregate. Double click that. So person ID equals person ID. And that's going to tell the query, hey, when you see Brian Omega, I want his record types specifically to be associated with him. Now, before I hit Save and Close, I want to make one observation. Down in the right-hand corner of the query display, you can see how many records the query is currently pulling. So right now it's 917. And it's important as you make changes to your query to keep an eye on that number. If it jumps up so that you have a ton more lines, or if it decreases dramatically, those are things to keep an eye out for. That might be an okay thing, but it might mean that we've added some bad data to our query. So let's just keep an eye on that. If I hit Save and Close, and then we regenerate the report, now we can immediately see that the report has updated. It looks a little different from what we just saw. And the number down in the right-hand corner, instead of 917, now it's 960 records. If I take a closer look at the query, we can see that Danny is showing up on multiple lines now. And so is Cam, so is Mallory. But the information in the query itself hasn't changed. We're still just seeing their name and their address. So it just looks like Danny is showing up multiple times. And this highlights a really important point that you can refer to when you're debugging your queries. But when we added our data set, now the query has access to the aggregate. So even though we haven't actually added the record type column to our query yet, you don't have that as one of the columns in the display, the base data set is now including the results of the aggregate in the query. So to help us understand better what's going on, I'm going to come over to the aggregate data set. You can see when we join it to our person table, it appears nested underneath. And now when I right-click it and choose Add Column, I have access to the columns that I've added to the aggregate. So now I can choose record type, and I'm going to save and close just like that. So that's going to add record type to our columns list. And as soon as we added it, our query updated, and now we can see on the right-hand side that yes, Danny is showing up multiple times, but there actually is different information for each one of those lines. The reason that he's showing up multiple times is because he has multiple record types. So this illustrates a couple of really important points. The first is that when you're dealing with entities and different data points and you're pulling them into your report, it's possible to accidentally add additional lines to your report that you weren't expecting. This is important to keep track of so that our final report has accurate numbers and accurate amounts if it's a historic giving report. We just want to make sure that the data that we're pulling in and that we're presenting is clean and accurate for the end user. The other point that this highlights, and we touched on this in the previous video, is that some data points can have a one-to-one relationship, whereas others can have a many-to-one relationship. So in this example, one person can have one record type, or they can have multiple record types. And because they have multiple record types, the query is automatically creating new lines for each record type. In some situations, that might be okay. That might be the way that you want the report to display. But in other situations, we can see that it looks like now we have 960 CRM records, when really we have less than that. So now that we have an aggregate data set and we're pulling in a data point that has a many-to-one relationship to our person, I want to walk through one more example where we can use one of our modifiers and the aggregate data set to give us accurate results on the right-hand side. Let's say instead of 960, I want my query to show exactly how many records we have in our CRM. I'm going to come over to my aggregate data set because this is where the many-to-one relationship is happening. What I want to do is use a group by statement to group all of these lines for each individual person into one line. So in doing that, Danny's going to be on one line again, Cam is going to be on one line, and so on. So if I come over to the aggregate and I open up the group by statement, I'm going to choose a column to group by, and I'm going to choose person ID. So I'll just double click that. We're grouping by the person ID. And again, what that's going to do is it's going to take all of the lines that are specific to a person ID and it's going to compress them into one line. I'm going to hit save and close. So now this is grouping by person ID. If I regenerate the report, you can see that the right-hand corner number is back to what it was before. It's 917, and each person is showing up on their own line. So in making this fix, it looks like the report is accurate again, but this illustrates one more thing that we need to consider as we're moving our data and we're adding conditions. As we can see on Danny's line here, he has the record type column, but now it's only showing one record type. So this illustrates an important rule whenever we use the group by modifier. When we use a group by, it groups the person by their ID and it compresses them all into one line. But if there's a column that has multiple values, it also compresses that column and it chooses just a random value from that column. So in this case, it's choosing only one record type for Danny. It could have been any of his record types, but this time it's showing donor. So that's another point of data validation that you want to make sure you're paying attention to as you create your query, because now it looks like Danny only has one specific record type, whereas he really originally has 5. So the rule when using a group by statement is that when you group by a specific column, you need to apply aggregate functions to the rest of the columns in the data set. And again, an aggregate function usually means the sum of something, the average of something. It's a calculation over all of the values in a specific column. In our case, with our record type column, we're going to use a special string function. So I'm going to come into the record type data point and open that up. And since this is being grouped by person ID, I need to use an aggregate function here. So this is one that I have written down. You don't need to memorize this. Again, the internet is your best friend when it comes to SQL statements. But this is basically saying group concat, so bring together all of the values in this column and separate them by commas. So I'm going to save and close this. And now when we regenerate our report, we'll see that Danny, he's still on one line, so our number is accurate. There's still 917 records in our CRM. Everything is accurate up to the record type column. And it's a little difficult to see in this view, but we'll show it in our data view in a second. But we can see when we hover, we have the Hall of Me, comma, recurring donor, comma. Now it's listing all of Danny's record types in a single cell. So basically when the group by compressed all of his lines into one, we had to use that aggregate function to break out the record types and to pull them all into a single cell. So now I'm going to bring our new record type column that we created. I'm going to pull it into our person basic information view, and I'll preview that. And this is what our view will look like for the end user. Now we can see a little easier all the different record types that are applied to each person. And now we've just customized your view even further to pull in relevant information for your team. So with this example, we've walked through at a high level the different modifiers that we can use on our reports, how to add an aggregate data set and some of the situations where that's useful. Then we brought those two concepts together to show you how aggregate data sets and modifiers can be used together to update your query with helpful and accurate data. In future videos, we'll go through more situations where aggregate data sets and modifiers can be used to shape your query. Thank you guys. See you next time.